Got it. Good job. Now I'll be careful how I talk. All right, Brian, this is attendance.
Yes.
Okay. Wayne is not here. Greg Johnson, yes?
Yep.
I think I saw you. Justin? No. Mary Brandley?
Yes.
Hillary Griffiths? No.
She's a
Rob
no.
Rouleau? Rob here?
Bob,
I didn't hear that.
it's Bob.
Oh, okay. Let's see who else. Justine?
Here.
You're here. Jennifer Gaudette? Krista Silva? Mark Anderson?
Here.
Yes, perfect. Anthony?
Here.
Yes. Matthew Johan?
Here.
Perfect. And Nick?
Here.
Good, perfect. There we are. There's all the voting members. So pursuant to Governor Baker's executive order dated July 16th, 2022, extending certain pandemic-related policy measures. This authorizes the continuation of remote meetings and public access under the open meeting law. This meeting will be held virtually using Zoom technology. Go ahead, Phil. It's all yours.
Thanks. Thank you, Jerry. While Chris is uploading his screen, do you want to deal with approving meeting minutes from last
Yeah.
meeting?
I'd like to, we have a majority right now. I'd like to do that. I don't know who went online and saw the minutes, but I sent out a copy, I don't know, 3 o'clock, 3:30 this afternoon. Were there any edits on those minutes that anybody noticed that were things that were drastically inaccurate? Go ahead, Mary.
No, it was more of a comment. I thought the minutes were fine. So we talked about how the schematic design was going to be, we were going to have a tri-board meeting on the 3rd of April. And I think we should get that word, coordinate that with the FinCom and the select board sooner versus later. So we've all got that in the book because there's so many meetings that go on. So.
Yeah, good point. Good, that's a valid point. Thank you. All right, that's it. I'm going to do by a roll call. Voting members.
I will move to accept the minutes for January 17th.
Yep. Is there a second?
I can
Second.
Who was that, Mary?
Yep, or Tony.
Oh, okay, thank you. We'll let Tony have his
Yeah.
fair share. Okay, Brian.
Yes.
Greg Johnson.
Yes.
Justin has not joined yet. Mary Brandley.
Yes.
Hillary is not joined. Rob Rouleau has not.
Yes.
Joined. Oh, Rob.
Yes.
Thank you. Justine.
Yes.
Krista Silva's not joined. Mark Anderson.
Yes.
And Anthony.
Yes.
Matthew Johan.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Perfect. Those are the voting members. Thank you very much. Phil, Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you. So first slide, we just want to kind of refresh folks on project timeline that we discussed at the January 17th building committee meeting. So we talked about, since the December 6th select board meeting, creating that working group and kind of working around with the working group, the different topics they got to work through to kind of get and rebuild that select board confidence and just overall project confidence from all folks involved. So since we last met as a building committee on January 17th, we've actually had a couple of working group meetings, one on January 23rd and one on the 26th. And we'll get into those items at the next slide. But what we talked about last week or the January 17th building committee meeting was to put placeholders for February 13th and February 27th for building committee meetings in the event we have working group meetings after today, which probably is going to happen. And then we talked about the first half of March being the schematic design cost estimate reconciliation process. So the actual reconciliation meeting and then any back and forth we have to have with the estimators afterwards. March 20th being the building committee meeting where we seek approval for that schematic design budget. March 27th being the date where we upload any refinements or any updates to the schematic design document. So building committee, select board, school committee, FinCom can start their review of that schematic design submission. And like Mary mentioned, a placeholder in folks' calendars for April 3rd for any type of joint meeting that folks think we should have to discuss any of the schematic design documents. And then April 17th being the building committee meeting to seek approval to submit the SD submission to MSBA. And then April 18th being the select board meeting to seek approval to submit it. And then April 27th is when we actually submit it to MSBA. Any questions on that timeline? Okay. Next slide, Chris. So the agenda items we wanted to go over tonight, and again, these are items that we discussed at a couple working group meetings leading up to tonight. HVAC system selection update and kind of get into the life cycle cost analysis that was used weeks or months ago to support that HVAC system selection. Discuss the renewable energy scope of work that we've got some advancements on that relative to information from Select Energy, one of Maynard's vendors relative to PV. Lead certification, the lead certification process that we're going to go through for the project. Operations and maintenance budget forecasting for the proposed new building. And then talk about the Maynard Sustainability Committee letter we received on January 20th, and then discuss topics associated with an email we received from the select board chair on January 23rd. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris to get into the presentation.
All right, thank you, Phil. So HVAC system selection update. So if you remember back during the PSR phase, a sustainability subcommittee meeting was meetings were had. The subcommittee was formed. We had maybe 4 or 5 meetings in total.
Hey, Chris,
we established.
can I interrupt just for a second? Can everybody please mute their mics? A bit of background noise coming in there. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Jerry. So we reviewed Maynard's sustainability goals that were issued to us via a letter. We reviewed HVAC systems, established review criteria, and then the sustainability subcommittee recommended a preferred system to go with, which was then forwarded to and discussed with the overall building committee. And that was selected as the preferred HVAC system, which would have been the central heat pump. It's an all-electric HVAC system. So I'll turn it over to Marty. He can talk about the life cycle cost analysis.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So as Chris had mentioned, we had evaluated a number of HVAC systems, and we've taken a second look at 3 of the systems, and we wanted to make sure that we took advantage of all possible incentives and rebates that are available. So the 3 systems that are on the screen now are, the first 2 are all electric systems, being no fossil fuel burnt on site. They are both central heat pumps, and the difference is option 1 is an air source heat pump, which exchanges energy with the ambient air outside the building. The second option is a geothermal heat pump, which would exchange energy with the ground via a number of drilled wells. And the third option is a more conventional gas-fired boiler option, which obviously would use fossil fuel on site. This slide encompasses all the available rebates based on our information from Eversource and the Inflation Reduction Act. The geothermal heat pump system is the most efficient system of the 3 that are shown. And as a result, it has the highest initial cost. However, it is eligible for the most possible rebates. So right now, through all incentives, including the Inflation Reduction Act, which would essentially pick up 40% of the cost of the wells, the central geothermal heat pump is eligible for just over 1.2 million in rebates. When that is factored into the overall cost, including energy costs, maintenance costs, and longevity of the system, over the 20-year period that the life cycle cost was evaluated, the central heat pump is the lowest cost of the 2 all-electric systems for a life cycle cost over the 20 years. Again, it still has a high initial cost, but the rebates, assuming that all eligibilities come through, would be refunded to the town through some process on the utility group. The lowest initial cost is the gas-fired fossil fuel option that has very little rebates available to that. Does have a little, it's only 16,000 for the efficiency of the boilers, which is calculated into life cycle cost. That has the lowest initial and life cycle cost of all the systems, just due to the very low initial construction cost associated with that.
Any questions?
Yes.
No, just asking if there are any questions.
Yeah, Marty, I have a question. These rebates for the ground source heat pumps. I mean, how much of a percentage confidence do you have that that's actually going to happen?
The basis of the rebates is assuming that we can achieve a energy intensity unit of 25 or less, which is relatively aggressive, involves other portions of the buildings, can be done. Could I say I can't guarantee it at the moment, obviously, but
Right.
it can be done. Obviously, there are just costs associated with achieving.
All right.
those.
So, I mean, it's not something you see up front. It's something that happens after we have installed the system.
Correct.
And that
So
we show, and then they have to do an energy analysis based on actual energy usage to see if we've achieved it. Is that
yeah,
correct?
there's certain portions of that rebate that are granted at the end of construction, and there are some after the first year of occupancy
Right.
that are granted.
After
So
they've- yeah,
there's
they've
initial
conceived.
evaluation that has to take place, and that's all obviously, post funding, I guess, if we want to call it that, from the beginning.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. There's a lot of incentives out there to make efficient buildings. So what would you say the likelihood is of receiving these?
I would say it's relatively high. I mean, if our goal is LEED Gold certification or certifiable for the building.
Yeah.
Those are pretty efficient buildings to start with. I mean,
Yes.
any new building now is going to be very efficient. These three options we're looking here are the top three that you can have essentially. And if we're adding on the LEED Gold criteria to that, I think
Yeah.
we're very close to meeting all those criteria.
Okay.
Marty, I think a big part of why ultimately the decision was made for the top row there, central air source heat pump system, was because the geothermal involved a temporary heating system at kind of occupancy of the new building. Can you speak to that part of this?
Sure. The site, the only practical place to put the wells that appears right now is the site of the existing building. So based through construction phasing, the plan is to construct the new building, move the kids from the existing school to the new school, and then demo the existing school. So the wells could not be drilled until the existing school is demoed, but students will already be in the new school during that time frame. So based on our phasing plan, we looked at it as we would need a temporary heating system for that school, probably for the first 6 to 8 months of occupancy, assuming demolition can start on the existing school in June. Students occupy the new building in September. It would probably take from, August to February or so, somewhere around that range.
Well, we have to
drill the
assume
wells.
it's going to be a year. What system were you thinking of using for the temp?
For the temporary, we're looking at gas-fired hot water boilers to provide
Okay.
heating. We weren't planning on a temporary cooling system at this
So,
point.
no, but I'm just saying then that once the boiler is there, if there's an emergency of some kind, you could actually use it as a backup throughout the life of the building.
Well, the plan was it'd be temporary, so it'd be a trailer mounted boiler next to the
Oh, I
building
see.
and eventually be taken away. It wasn't a permanent fixture.
I see.
And those costs are included in the overall construction cost listed in the third column there.
What would be the difference in cost if we were to put a permanent gas-fired system in and use it as a temporary, but have it as a backup? I mean, would
Um,
that be significantly more than the trailer mounted?
It would probably be, for the trailer mounted, for both the rental, fuel usage and assemble and disassemble. The value was approximately 100,000. To put a boiler system in the building to serve as backup. Maybe 2.5 times that cost.
So 250,000.
Yeah,
I mean, that's something to consider.
yeah.
You know, I mean, if you have a permanent system that's used as a backup only, it's a temporary, so you can open the school on time, get the wells in, and we know that those systems last longer.
Yeah.
So, you know, to me, that sounds like practical, taking care of two problems, to make sure because I believe the water sourced heat pump is probably going to get the highest reimbursement. Because that's sort of something that they're pushing right now. So, and it's a very good system too, and
Yeah.
economical. So, I mean, economical in terms of its energy efficiency. So with the rebates, you know, that might, I don't know, what do people think of that?
Well, I guess, Marty, just one more question. So is it safe to say, so this number in the total HVAC construction cost column, 9.45 million, it's safe to assume that number is just the number associated with the HVAC scope, right? It's not the GC's general conditions and all that, because you figure if this construction project is all of a sudden a year longer, I don't know, you're probably looking at another, I don't know, $1.5 million in general conditions or something along those lines.
Well, that would be assuming that the contractor would be on site. I think they'd be off site. We could have just a subcontractor doing the geo, but I see what you mean. You want to keep them under the warranty.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true, but I'm wondering if we could do that as a separate package, you know, doing the wells separately from the infrastructure of the thing. So we don't have this general contractor hanging on for a year waiting, you know, building up general conditions. So that way we could, I want to look into that because there's no reason why that geothermal field that we put in it's its own entity, you know, and it's pretty straightforward technology. And then all it needs is a connect up to the thing. We could probably save money doing that.
yeah. I know the other concerns were ledge on site, but Mary, you got a question?
Yeah, Marty, between the geothermal and the air source, which have you seen the most experience with up to this point for schools for this type of scenario?
For schools that are trying to achieve net zero or net zero ready, ones that are really looking for the highest efficiency, geothermal is probably the most common and rising. But there are a lot of air source heat pump projects out there in different realms. Air source heat pump can almost cover with an umbrella statement of VRF system, which are variable refrigerant systems. It's very similar technology. So if you lump those all together, air source is probably more common, but geothermals are very common, particularly for high efficiency schools.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think if we are going that way, if there's ledge, see, by doing that section of the work separately, and that would maybe even including the demo, it's not 149 anymore. It's vertical construction. So you can basically get subcontractors to do the whole thing. That way you save money on the general contractor's markup and everything. So I would like to see that as a separate package that we could do later in the project once, and yet with the backup system, you can occupy the school and not be rushed into, you know, trying to get everything done and trying to get on. I mean, the system will work fine until such time that you can switch over, and that becomes a separate contract. It's not even in the general contractor's scope. You know, we do the demo, and we're doing that on many projects. We've done demo, abatement demo, and site work of all kinds as separate contracts. Usually we do it at the beginning of the job, but in this case, we'll do it at the end of the job. Same thing. So as construction winds down and you evacuate the school, we then we'll already have this package ready to go out to bid. It may already be out to bid. And so when school is out, they can get right to the abatement demo and the installation of those. So you can switch over sooner rather than later. But it should be separate. So, I mean,
Mark,
if we end up going this way, that's what my recommendation is.
Yeah, thanks. I understand the rationale between the separate contract and the separate package there at the end. I think there's a little bit of an issue that can be raised and some risks that we're going to encounter if we factor in the construction of the geothermal well and the connection to the building. You're going to end up with a situation where you have two contractors that have the potential to point fingers at each other if the system isn't working properly once the system's installed and the connection's made. We've run into that in other buildings that I've been a part of, where you break out that part, and as soon as there's something wrong with that system and it's not performing the way it's intended, they're just going to be pointing fingers at each other, and we're going to have a hard time getting our warranty fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, but it is a fairly low tech type of work. You know, these pumps are pretty standard, and you know, there's nothing exotic about them. I just found that this kind of thing can be done, and it's just work to connect pumps to a system that's already in place. But you know, if you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. I'm looking for ways to save money on this. You're saving quite a bit of money.
It's certainly worth the value. We just have to make sure that the cost saving is worth.
Absolutely. We'll vet this with many people, but I can tell you that because it's really a low tech thing. Once those wells are in, you don't do anything to them. There's very little maintenance. I mean, they last there. Marty, what's the lifespan of those pumps?
Typically for the geothermal systems, we're looking at 50-year lifespan for all the
There you
piping.
go. So they're there for a long time. And you know, you only get a 1-year warranty from a general contractor. It's not like, you know, you're going to get that for any longer than that. Unless you discover a problem during that 1-year period, you have no warranty for general. But what the general contractor does is adds 15 to 20% on top of all those costs for that, for both the demo and all the stuff you're doing, the site work afterwards. That's all chapter, I think it's 30B or whatever, where you're doing, it's all horizontal construction. So you do not need a general contractor. You generally get a site contractor to oversee that with experience. We make sure that they're pre-qualified, and that way we can get that work done separately. I mean, it'll be already in the bidding process when you occupy the school. So it will be pretty quick once you're ready to demo the building.
Justine.
Sorry, thanks. Just a couple of questions, Marty. You mentioned that, you do have experience, the schools that are trying to be net zero, and that's when they install these. What about the schools that are trying to keep their costs down? Is that the same if they're trying to build a fiscally responsible project? Is that the same? Are you seeing the same type of thing?
There's almost two lines of thought with this, if you will. If the commitment is there to go non-fossil fuel, which is the big first commitment, if that commitment has been decided, or as a town or a committee, we moved into that direction, geothermal air source heat pump, that they're kind of neck and neck for what you see out there for both net zero or just high efficiency buildings. A LEED Gold is in that criteria. So once we make that distinction between the two, either system is appropriate at that point. Again, the air source heat pump is a little more cost effective upfront, but with all the rebates that are available, the geothermal one is slightly less. Keeping in mind that the rebates are we're assuming we're eligible for all possible rebates, and the rebates would not come in until after the project is done to some level. So as far as financing the project, you're still looking at that first bigger number for your initial contract with the contractors.
Okay. And I'm just curious, I know we talked a little bit about the fact that obviously that site is on ledge. So does the $9.4 million, does that include the drilling through the ledge?
It does. We made some assumptions on the well cost and the quantity of wells. Some of it depends on how deep they can go if they run into ledge. So there are construction cost estimates that are included in that $9.45 million for the wells.
Yeah.
Okay. And the MSBA, that's, Phil, maybe you can answer this, is just, so this is considered, this would be something that they could include, just like any other heating system. So this would get, this would just be part of the cost of the school that they would
Yes.
hopefully reimburse.
Yeah, so my concern, Justine, is they typically don't love the idea of paying twice for things, right? So something tells me they would view the initial cost of this temp HVAC system as, paying for it the first time, and then, the geothermal being the second time. So I'm assuming they would, I'd have to coordinate with them on that. I don't know that many MSBA projects have done this, kind of complete the final HVAC system after the fact.
Well, no, we've had that in different forms, Phil, where there's many cases where you have to have temporary heating, especially when we do additions and reno projects, that happens all the time. So I'm just saying that we call this a temporary measure, which it is, and we just leave it there. It's temporary. It's not, when you think of the cost here of 250,000, on 50 million plus building, it's de minimis.
Justine, I would want to further coordinate with MSBA. That's my 2 cents on that. Mary,
Remember, Phil, it's 250,000. Okay. So I don't think it's personally, I don't think it's a big issue.
Okay. Mary, do you have another question? Or?
Yeah, no, more of a comment. If we're going to do the geothermal, and I think I brought this up initially when we were saying, could we do a hybrid? So I actually like the idea, if we're going down that route, of not having the temporary system, but to have the backup boiler, gas boiler, because that way, if the costs get exorbitant with the electricity, we can, go back to the gas and vice versa. So it gives us more leverage, sort of like pitting Comcast against Verizon is sort of. So I like that ability for an extra 150,000 versus spending 100 and then not getting anything at the other end. So that's just me personally. If the MSBA is okay with this.
The one caution I would throw out there is we would have to review this with Eversource. I don't know if their incentives are based truly on an all-electric system. If we have a hybrid system there.
Now, what I'm saying is that this is still a temporary measure.
Yeah.
What the school decides to do with it later is up to them.
Okay.
What about air conditioning with a temp system?
That's a good point. That one,
Yeah, right now, we did not
Yeah.
include anything for a temp
Right.
AC system based on the phasing of the project. If one's needed, again, probably a temporary electric air-cooled chiller.
well, are we
would be
doing
our-
dehum on this systems?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are we doing dehumidification? Is this a displacement?
These are full cooling systems. We can do displacement ventilation as part of that.
Yeah.
So we still have the
I
indoor
think-
air quality and everything that we're
see,
looking for.
that's better.
Yeah.
In terms of how we deliver this energy, because see, a displacement system is anybody walking into a building like this that has displacement and dehumidification, you think it's air conditioned. It really, it takes all the humidity out of the air. So it's automatically 10 degrees cooler, 10 to 15 degrees cooler. And we've seen this time and time again, where you don't have, the only place that might, if some of the offices get the full air conditioning and things like that. So they would be the only ones that would be lagging a little bit, but all the classrooms and other spaces would be on this dehumidification, I think is pretty comfortable. So if we're looking at one school year or less than a school year, if we, as I said, let's suppose we are completing with the job sometime prior to the summer or before you enter, which is a good time to try to judge it. Then you have that whole summer to begin this installation process. And how long do you think it will take to install the pumps, Marty?
The well systems, once they're able to drill, is probably a few months, I'm thinking. Again, not knowing what they run into for ledge or anything like that, but
Right.
the intent is that the cooling system would essentially be online before we reach the cooling season,
Yes.
of the spring of the first occupied year.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If we
Yeah.
open in September, which is the opening date for everybody. And then you don't need the AC as much during the spring, the fall season. You may have a day or two.
Yep.
But with dehumidification, the classrooms should be okay. And we can do something in the offices temporarily, I think, anyway. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I think
we
that works out well.
would have the same situation, even if we do a trailer mounted one. It's not, it's going to happen, because of you can't really wait for them to put the wells in and not have school.
Yep.
Because you have to tear the school down. You don't have a school to go to unless you go to the new one. So we just want to make it as comfortable as possible, and then, get it done and move on.
Yep.
So, I mean, I just looking at these ways of trying to accommodate what I've heard, Mary, is that, this struggle. So if we can do this system that could be a backup, and that's all it is a backup that we're going to do temporarily and throw it away. You're doing it temporarily and keeping it. And using it, judiciously, but the idea is that it's an all-electric building and it has a backup system.
Is the backup gonna have air conditioning?
Well, once the wells are included, the backup, yeah, I mean, the backup is not required for air conditioning. It's just for the, help me out, Marty.
If we're looking at a temporary boiler, either trailer mounted or something permanent in the boiler room for backup, that would be for heating only. And the intent
Right.
is that the permanent system, which is the geothermal system we're talking about now, would be online before we reach the spring,
Yeah.
of the first school year. So we wouldn't, right now, we're not proposing a backup cooling system for the fall of the first year, but if that's something that's we think we need, it's something we can look at. And that would most likely be a temporary trailer mounted unit that goes away at the end. Not sure that's something that'd be worthwhile keeping as a backup, as an air cooled.
Yeah, I think, again, my experience in schools over the many years, I hate to say how many, but it seems like a lot longer, that we never had air conditioning, and, except little units here and there, split type units. So, I mean, I know that's what people are expecting, but I think just for a few, maybe 2 months, maybe September and a little bit of October, and then, that would be the only time that there might be some little bit of, not discomfort, but, it's just not the temperature you may want, but it's not unlivable either. And it wouldn't be classrooms.
What is the plan for domestic hot water?
Right now, if we go geothermal, it would be a geothermal heat pump separate from the heating heat pump for domestic hot water. If it's an air source heat pump, it would probably be electric resistance heat. The air source heat pump technology, this doesn't support domestic hot water well at this point.
Right.
That technology is growing all the time, but on the air source side, it doesn't work out great for the domestic hot water. On the geothermal side, it is a good option.
So for domestic hot water, until you have those wells drilled, what are we using?
We would probably do an electric resistance, or if we do bring gas into the building, we could do it as an indirect off of the temporary boiler.
Yeah, if we're gonna use that boiler and leave it in the school, why not put indirect water heaters?
Yeah, that's a good possibility for the, for the alternative to it. Yes.
Jennifer Gaudet, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding these numbers correctly. So it looks like, and I just lost the screen, it looks like from this analysis that if we went with the geothermal, with or without the rebates, we are reducing the gap between the cheaper gas-fired boiler and the central air source heat pump. And looking at all of the numbers, we are also reducing the maintenance cost per year. It's actually lower than the gas boiler, with slightly higher operating costs per year for the geothermal. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yes, so if we look at the life cycle cost analysis without rebates, the gas-fired system is lower cost, both initial and at the end of the 20 years. With rebates, the gas-fired one is still would cost less, but it's much closer. The gap on that is,
Right.
gets
Okay.
reduced greatly.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure I was looking at those numbers correctly. Thank you.
Yep, and the big difference in the items that I just discussed is the rebates and incentives that we're thinking. Right now, we have it estimated at just over 1.2 million in incentives and rebates. So that number is really weighing heavily for the geothermal system.
Ken Newhouser, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
I see we have an asterisk on the energy cost per year. So just looking, I guess, a two-part question. Can you tell us about the rates that are going into this? And also tell us how, if there is renewable generation on site, how that would affect the cost?
Yes, so the rates were compiled based on last year's rates of the school for energy costs. And there's a 5% escalator that's applied to the energy cost as a projection for the rates in the future. Obviously, that's a big unknown. I don't think anyone
Sure.
could tell us that, or we'd all be investing in the stock market and not have to be at this meeting. But the energy rates are a moving target. But the life cycle cost analysis program does make an assumption for increase in energy costs. But we did restructure those costs based on the actual gas and electric rates that we received from the existing school for last year.
So the starting point is there.
Yes.
Based on data we have. And then if there is electricity generated on site, assuming that would cover and that would reduce the amount of purchased electricity.
It does, and I think Chris has that on one of the slides coming up, but we didn't include it in this slide, only we didn't want to confuse the point of
Sure.
Any on-site generated electricity will be for all the electricity consumed, not just the HVAC side. So we didn't want to confuse that with portions going to HVAC, portions going to, plug and outlet load. But I think Chris does have a slide on the renewable on-site options that we looked at.
So any other questions on this life cycle cost analysis? Okay.
Does Jen have her hand up? Sorry.
Oh. Jennifer, you all set, or did you have another question?
I'm all set. I'm sorry. I had a hard time unmuting.
Okay. So just before we leave, if I could just make one point, obviously the rebates are playing heavily on this. So
Yeah.
Just make sure everyone's aware that that's something that's not upfront funded, that comes in after construction. So however the financing is allocated for that would just have to take into account the timing of that rebate and incentives.
Okay, then, and Marty and Chris and Frank, like if there's a decision made to change HVAC systems, how soon do we want that known?
Soon.
Yeah,
ASAP.
yeah.
Right.
We're a pretty tight schedule coming up for the SD submission.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As well as the estimate. We'll have to get the estimators any new information, Phil, as you know,
yep.
so they can make an adjustment before the reconciled meeting.
So I guess, can we hear from building committee voting members and hear your thoughts? And Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, Phil, I think, well, I know one of the things you're going to talk about at the end of the meeting is us having another subgroup meeting.
Yeah.
I would suggest that this is a subject that really needs to be discussed in detail in that group.
Yeah. Anthony?
Yeah, just that, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to leave it in a few minutes early, but the thing is, well, you've seen the letters about the sustainability. The issue I think we're gonna run up against is the general public vote is going to look at cost, and they're like, well, why aren't the gas system's the cheapest and all of that. But then we've already heard from other people that are like, well, unless we put the sustainability in, then it's not going to get support at other levels. So we need to figure out where the spot is that we can get the whole thing through. And that's what I've been, as I'm listening to these, that's one of the things. And it came out in the community forums. People were like, wanted us to pump the brakes on this. So I'm not saying, not to, but I think we need to quickly go back and as Jerry said, and rethink about or reevaluate.
Yeah, Justine.
Yeah, I am kind of on the same path as Anthony. I feel like especially where, and I understand that the maintenance costs are lower for geothermal, and I do understand that. But if the residents see a large number for the building, it's not going to pass. And so, I don't think it's going to make a difference to them that they could get $700,000 back. I think they're going to see that up front and just say no.
Okay.
Yeah, again, it's really the committee's decision as the representatives of the town and this project to, sometimes you got to make the hard decision and then explain why you're making that decision. So you certainly have looked at everything. So I think that's fair. This committee is a very well diversified committee in the sense that you all come from different backgrounds and parts of the city and town, excuse me. And, you've come to an informed decision, which you think is best for the town. I think that's fair. And, you're going to get people that disagree with you no matter what you do. It doesn't matter. Remember, you only need 50% plus one vote. You don't need everybody, and you're not going to get everybody. So I think that's something that the folks in town that understand, the way the town works, a beautiful community and all the great cultural and historical stuff that happens there and is there, got to make that decision based on that, not because of what some people think you should do.
Nick Kane.
We're all we're all looking for sustainability, but we have to make our own decisions on it.
All right, I've got something to ask about our efficiency for our boilers on site having a certain value versus getting the bulk of our electricity through the grid. And I know the town has been looking at potentially, bundling is what I'll say, some sort of rates of, levels of green electricity you're going to get.
Yeah.
Can the argument be made, and this is sort of, I'm playing devil's advocate here,
Sure.
of saying that when we're burning fossil fuels, we're doing it at such a high efficient rate with our boilers on site, we're still better than electricity for, overall carbon footprint, if you will, until electricity gets better? Is there something to say that we're doing this for the next 20 years and we're okay, and then afterwards, I think we talked about the system switching over to a different all electric system without having to take the guts out of the whole building. Is that something we could say that we're doing the best we can now with the best boilers we can get? For a 20-year lifespan of the boilers, not 50 years lifespan for the building.
There's some really compelling parts of that argument, and that is that in 20 years, can you imagine where the technology will be? And so we know we have a field where we can put geothermal wells, and that
or more solar panels if we had to,
or solar, yeah,
if that progresses.
Yeah, so what we want to do is be net zero ready, and if you have a long range plan, that could be part of your long range plan, and commit to it. That we're going to be ready for this, and so the systems could be convert it to all electric, simply. Is that a fair statement, Marty?
It was, and that was one of the conversations we had previously with the difference between the air source heat pump and central geothermal heat pump. Those systems lend themselves well to change out the head end equipment at a later date.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to do it at year 1 because there's a lot of value that you're throwing away. At year 20, when the air source heat pump has already surpassed its useful life because you have exterior equipment. At that point, that would be a very valid conversation to have.
Yeah, but I think what they're saying, Marty, is if we go with a gas-fired system.
Yep.
To start with the idea of converting to, say, geothermal well system in 15, 20 years, when things are more efficient and so forth, and it's part of their plan. How doable is that?
That would be a very similar arrangement. We do replace the head and equipment being the boilers with a heat pump.
Yeah.
And then the geothermal portion of it at that point. Yes. So that's all a possible option. We can incorporate into the design of it.
So the question was really about how good is electricity we're getting now? If we say we're pushing our guilt upstream, is there an argument to be made that it's not worth it for I don't know how many years? I don't know the real math. I'm asking the question of the group to help us understand when the argument happens with the town.
Right.
On site, we're producing heat through fossil fuels at probably at 96% efficient, 96 to 97% efficient, somewhere in those optimistic goals. But above 90% is a safe number. The efficiency you get from the electric grid right at the moment is much less than that. Just due to technology that's out there for turbines or generators, however it's run. And currently, I think the Department of Energy has it listed that nationwide electricity, about 60% of all electricity used is produced by fossil fuels. And shockingly, about 20 or 22% of that electricity is produced by coal, believe it or not, still. Not in this area of the country, but in certain areas. So there's still a lot of coal-fired generation plants out there. So if I understand kind of the discussion you're thinking, Nick, how clean are we producing on site with fossil fuel versus how clean is the grid at current stage? We're probably a little cleaner producing on site, but 5 years from now, that may not be the case, or 10 years from now or something from there. But the modern gas-fired boiler systems are, very efficient, but obviously we still have that on-site fossil fuel concept to deal with.
Ken, I see you. Jennifer, your hand's been up a bit. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I have a question and a comment. What is the efficiency for the geothermal? Is that getting energy from the grid or is that different?
The geothermal does get electricity. It's an all-electric system. The efficiencies are much greater because it's using the geothermal wells as its main source of energy transfer.
So if we were to compare the geothermal to the gas-fired, then that analysis that we're burning, cleaner fossil fuels and we're getting energy from the grid, that does not apply to comparing the geothermal to the gas-fired?
Yeah, well, I guess the answer to the question is we would use more electricity in either the geothermal or the air source heat pump than we would with a gas-fired boiler, because half the year you're using natural gas for your energy source rather than electric. If we were to break it down for carbon, amount of CO2 we put in the atmosphere, we'd really have to kind of analyze that to see what produced the most.
Okay, thanks. And then I guess my comment is just more about, sort of similar to Anthony and Justine's comment. I appreciate that we are the building committee and that we represent a diverse, view of the town. I also think, given the fact that we now have the working group, given the email from the select board chair, that there are perspectives in the community that may carry more weight or be louder than members of this committee, regardless of the veracity with which we believe in the decisions that we're making. And so while I have my, if I were to make a personal sort of, this is what I think we should do, it might be one answer. I would really need to hear from members of the working group and other folks that this is something that both the building committee, the select board, the finance committee, well, these are more than two, but and the school committee are going to be able to support and message to the town. Because I think if there's any question in that, and there's, we're hesitating and hemming and hawing, and some people thought, but some people didn't, then that's where the folks in the town are not going to trust the process that we've gone through. And so I think we need more information from other folks who may not be on this call right now.
Ken?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I wanted to help Nick with the math here. And Marty, you said it would require some analysis, but we can do some real quick analysis right here. So the efficiency of the grid, pessimistically, Marty, would you think we could say it's about 30%?
Yeah, I think
Maybe high
30-31%. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
With
And
transmission
what is the COP of a ground source heat pump coefficient of performance, roughly?
It's 4.9, 5.1, something like that, I believe.
Okay.
Yep.
So we can take, let's just take 4.
Yep.
Times 30%. Right, and we're greater than 1. The coefficient of performance of the boiler, 90%, that's 0.9. So that's, if we want to look at on a real simple, rough way, relative to fossil fuel carbon impact today, it's at least that. And then as the grid gets cleaner, and as you pointed out, the coefficient of performance is 4 and up on the ground source heat pump. So that's what we're looking at. And I think we'll probably never, we might do a compost thing on site to generate methane and use in a boiler, but I don't know that we would really be offsetting that utility cost. That's all I gotta say.
No, great points. Thanks.
Yep.
So Jerry, I know you want to give this topic the pull, but Mary or Justine, I think you guys had your hands up. You took them down.
Yeah, my only question, Marty, and I don't even know if you can answer this, but if we were to do the gas-fired boiler now with the thinking that, maybe 20 years from now, and it would be on today's dollar, obviously, to convert to the geothermal, because that looks, well, it's tough because you're getting all the incentives, but would it be exorbitant price to change over at that point, or is it pretty much standard?
If you're waiting the 20-year period, what makes that more attractive is you're at the useful life of a lot of the equipment. So you're going to have to replace it anyways. So if it costs you $100 to put in a geothermal well right now, 20 years from now, it'd be $100 minus whatever it would cost for the boiler. I mean, those are just figures, obviously. It's not $100 to do anything, but so you have that discounted value because you'd have to replace the boiler system anyways, because it's at the end of its useful life. So it'd be the cost differential between the two at that point.
Okay, so it's
But
not ridiculous
you brought up a
price.
good point, though. Incentives are very much a moving target.
Right.
Today, they're very aggressive because they want to reduce fossil fuel use and want to get everyone on all electric. 20 years from now or 10 years from now, we just don't know what those would be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Justine?
I just wanted to speak quickly just to what personal thing regarding what Jen just mentioned about Jeff's email to the group or to everybody. Is I understand he's the chair of the select board, but this is just kind of a technical thing for me. We did not vote as a group. We did not vote as a select board. That is our opinion moving forward. So to me, the weight of that email is he is one person, just like anybody else. He happens to be the chair of the select board, but it does not mean he does not have the select board. We don't know what the select board thinks because we have not taken a vote on this.
Okay. So Jerry, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say what I said before. I think the subgroup needs to meet, and I'm going to suggest we meet a day next week if that's physically possible. We need to dig a little deeper into this and come out with a recommendation, and that's the recommendation. And we're going to recommend it to the full committee, and hopefully be able to support that well to the full committee, and then we'll take a vote at the next full committee meeting.
Okay.
And that's it. And we'll
Chris.
move it, and not everybody will be happy.
Yeah.
Some will support, some will not support. To the point somebody made earlier tonight, no matter which way you go, somebody's not going to be happy.
Yep.
So we have to make an informed decision, and we're the best group to do that. We are the most informed of every group within the town. So I think we need a subgroup next week, present to the full committee, and take a vote.
Okay. All right, Chris. You wanna continue on?
Okay, thank you, Phil. So as part of our due diligence in trying to reach the net zero ready concept, one of the things we've also looked at is the PV array system, right? The solar panels. And what we have here is a depiction of the roof plan. We sent that over to Select Solar, which is currently working with the district on the high school property. We've asked them, located rooftop equipment, and asked them to do an analysis regarding the quantity of renewable energy could be produced on the roof of the new school building. We also asked them to determine what the renewable energy generation could be if we put a canopy, a solar canopy, over the parking area to the southeast of the existing or the new building, which is shown in the upper right-hand corner. So it's a smaller area. They in turn sent us an analysis, which I'll share with you here today. So the calculated annual building use for electricity for this school is approximately 660 kilowatt. It's a pretty good size demand. The approximate average monthly electric costs are around $17,000 based on last year's utility bills and running through the systems of the new school. So the roof solar would provide approximately 240 kilowatt. And currently the rate would be 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The school does, or I should say the district does, have a power purchase agreement with Select. They do not own the equipment. So the contractor, or Select, if you will, owns and maintains the equipment, and then they negotiate with the town for an electric rate. The approximate 1 year forecasted savings based on that rate and the amount of energy produced would be about $10,200. Over the life of the system, a 20-year term, the savings would exponentially go up to about $386,000. So that's pretty good over the term at this point with the design that's there. Rates are going up, so it would obviously depend on the block rate that's secured by the town as you move forward. Then moving down a little bit, they did analysis for the solar canopy. I'll call it solar canopy number 1. That would produce approximately 160 kilowatts. And the rate for that would be 18 cents per kilowatt hour. Approximate year 1 forecast savings is in the negative. It would cost the town $11,900 to operate. And as you see, the 25-year term savings really should be a 20-year term. Actually, no, correct that. It's 25 years because of the cost. And the reason we're seeing that is because Select, as the owner of the equipment and the installer, they have to factor in the structural steel and the canopy construction into that. So for a small area, it does not become as efficient as just putting PVs on the roof, which would be, there's no canopy, the roof's already there, it's solar ready. They install it connected to the electrical system and off you go. So questions on this before I move forward. One of the things we did do is we went back and talked to Select about adding additional PVs in the front, as you can see here, and then possibly ground mount PVs in the open field areas that will exist when the existing building comes down. So they have not gotten back to us. We forwarded this information to them last week. I followed up with them this morning. They're still working on this, and they'll provide it in 2 forms. the additional canopy, they'll provide it, the ground mount, and then what would the package be? Canopies become a little bit more attractive when you do the whole package, because then you can offset your cost for structure and everything else with the total system, and then what the total block rate would be for that. So that's currently what we're looking at for PVs. What we're looking to do is have a total offset of your electrical use of 660 kilowatt per year.
Go ahead, Nick.
Just a simple question. Does having the PVs over the potential area for the ground source heat wells, do they block each other out? Like if you have the solar, can we not get down to do wells later or have wells under them?
So that's a good question, Nick. We would certainly have to coordinate that with both Select and the well company, but chances are a lot of today's ground mounts are ballasted. They may or may not, depending on the company, put footings in. So that would something we'd have to work out with Select, with the understanding that, hey, there may be a future for the PV. So similar to how Marty talks about the 20-year life cycle, right? Solar panels with the technology would likely have to be changed out after a term use.
Yeah.
Over 20 years, they should still capture, I believe, at least 80% of their efficiency, right? But as technology evolves and they become more efficient, maybe you can get more generation out of smaller panels. We'd have to talk about how that may be if in fact in 20 years you wanted to change out.
Excuse me, Chris, but I think the real issue is if you have the panels on the site where you're planning to put the wells, I think it's a temporary move of those. And you did point out we probably want the ballasted type for the areas where we've been drilling wells, so that they could move them and let the wells be there, so that there'd be flexibility there.
And then the wells can exist under them without a problem.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean,
Jennifer got that.
Sorry, I can't lower my hand. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. Justin.
Sorry, Phil. Just kind of give some clarification on Nick's conversation and his question regarding how the process of solar PVs, specifically ground mounts on our public assets, would be. So the conversation you're hearing right now would be a lease agreement between a third-party solar company and the town of Maynard. And with that being said, our assets would be secured. It'd be a phased-in approach, as you can hear the construction team talk about that as a whole. But what ends up happening, and my biggest concern would be the phased-in approach of solar before the wells. What ends up happening with these lease agreements, they're typically 20 years based on the life cycle of the infrastructure. But if there's a removal of the solar PV at any time within that 20 years caused by the owner, i.e. town of Maynard, there is a cost indicator reduction and a potential penalty on our lease agreement for any solar that wasn't produced. So my concern would be if we're talking about this as a whole, if we're looking at the ground source heat pumps, I would highly advise that we put that infrastructure in play prior to entering a 20-year lease agreement with the solar PV and the ground mounts. Now, I will say if we go into an agreement with the solar PV and we're talking about 100% on-site generation, then the ground source heat pumps in Justin's vision is a no-brainer. But if we don't, then obviously you saw the cost indications on the previous chart, and we're contending with a higher upfront cost and even a higher overall life cycle cost. But that can be reduced by on-site generation. And how much on-site generation is this committee willing to move forward when you're contending with other aspects of, is that location better suited for athletic fields? Is that location of those ground mounts and canopies change the aesthetic look of the campus, or specifically the Green Meadow? And is that going to get through certain committees as a whole? So just kind of weigh that. If we phase that in, there will be a penalty if we remove any solar PV from a site that we later put infrastructure on.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, for bringing up that latter stuff. So like Chris mentioned, we were hoping to go into today's meeting already hearing back from Select. So essentially, Chris sent this to Select Energy, and the goal was to kind of hear back from them on understanding, okay, what's the overall size we need PV array wise to get a full offset? And so the thought was we were going to come to today's meeting telling you guys, okay, see all these red indicators. This is the full array we would need size wise to do it, or it's half of that center lawn space. So we're still trying to figure that out. So Chris just wanted to kind of show kind of the largest magnitude, if you will, in terms of PV array without doing tree clearing and all that. That's kind of what you're looking at now. But I'm glad Justin brought up, we all know the center lawn space has always been thought of as exterior gym space, exterior recess space, youth athletics would be using it on nights and weekends and et cetera, et cetera. So that should all be part of the conversation too. Mary, did you have any?
No,
Mary,
my comment was exactly the same. If we're thinking about this in really using that front, that number 5, so it's exactly where you guys are, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. So lead goal
Hold on,
certification.
Chris, Ken has his hand up.
Okay,
Sorry to jump in late there. Just the clarification on the expected uses. You said it was 660.
yes,
Okay. And the square footage of the building, is it 100 square feet? 100,000 roughly?
right, 90,000.
90,000. Okay. So just, quick math on, I'm going to say 90 because 100,000 because it's easier for my head. And is it 25 kilowatt hour per square foot is the target for the zero net energy ready?
I'd have to check back with our electrical engineer, Ken.
Okay. All right, because that would get us to, just in simple math, 250. And I think it's not kilowatt hours, but thousands of kilowatt hours.
Thousands, yes.
Yeah.
So Ken, just to, we did talk with the engineers over at the Acton Boxborough project.
Okay.
Their building's approximately twice the size of this one, roughly.
Yeah.
Their annual building use is 1.2 megawatt,
Okay.
right? So it's about twice.
Yeah, so kind of in the ballpark.
Exactly.
Based on per square foot, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, just wanted to make, we probably got this from somewhere, but just it jumped out at me because we were talking 25 per square foot and it didn't match with the square footage that I remembered. Okay.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on. Lead goals certification. So things we're looking to accomplish with this project is to obtain LEED Gold certification, right? And that'll be through optimized performance, an optimized building enclosure or envelope, and our renewable energy. And some of the things we wanted to touch on are some of the highlights for leading that. This is the LEED certification scorecard. In order to achieve LEED Gold, we would need 60 to 79 points out of this. And some of the things we've highlighted, for example, location transportation would be green vehicles and installing electric vehicle charging stations on site. Indoor water use reduction by 35%. We'll get 4 credits for that. So these are some of the things we're really looking for as far as sustainability. When it comes to energy and atmosphere, optimized energy performance increased by 35% above the energy code. That's a huge one. Renewable energy production of at least 10%. I believe with the roof, we're looking at approximately close to 20% in energy regeneration, renewable energy regeneration. So there's some points there. The indoor environmental quality through interior lighting and daylighting will achieve some high quality points. And then through innovation and green building education. So see, these are some of the things that we constantly look at with all our schools. We will have an audit at the end of the project. There's a lot of documentation that goes along with that. And throughout the design and construction phase, we continue to analyze each of these points and look to obtain those credits. So our buildings are very efficient, and to achieve a minimum of 60 points should be without a doubt very attainable. So that's what we're looking to do. By obtaining LEED Gold certification, we can ensure that our building, whether it's in a gas fired, an electric, geotherm, air source heat pump, it will be a very energy efficient project by going through this process. And this certification does get audited. It's there's some by a third MSBA appointed third party contractor, if you will. They'll go through and do their energy audit along with the the building systems, the building envelope that gets looked at. They do infrared scans to make sure that heat loss or heat gain. So we're comfortable with the fact that achieving LEED Gold status will make this a very energy efficient building, regardless of the systems that are chosen for it. Any questions on obtaining this? Okay. So through some project research, as we mentioned, we talked to the engineers over that did the Acton Boxborough project. And for our project, some of the things we were looking at, obviously, is the PV renewable energy for the roof. And as Phil mentioned, we've sent out the plan over to the town's solar provider to talk about what additional solar we would need to make this a full renewable energy system, full offset. And then one of the things we're planning is, or talking about as part of this meeting and the sustainability subcommittee meetings that we held, was post-construction well field, right? The place that would be logical to do it would be in the fields that were created by abating and removing, demolishing the existing building, etc. When we looked at the Acton Boxborough project, this is a plan that was sent by the engineers that did that project. I've highlighted the geothermal well field, but when they went through and did their design, PV renewable energy was sized to match the use on the roof and the carports. So you can see the roof to the right is loaded with PVs, every available square foot, with the exception of walk pads and service areas. And then the entire front parking lot is consists of canopies, solar canopies. So there's quite a bit. If I remember correctly, the canopies provide more than half of the solar energy for that school. The roofs provide just under half. So it's like 40% on the roof, 60% in the canopies. So that's how they were able to achieve that full matching process. They also had a large geothermal well field available during construction. So that upper field area that we have clouded was an open field area that was available during the construction period. So they're able to drill the wells while the school was being built and prior to the existing one being torn down. So that reduced the need for temporary heat plants and things of that nature. The process was kind of seamless and was able to be done under one process. They've also incorporated a water collection system for flushing the toilets only. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on, because that was one of the questions about the sustainability committee had. Have we looked at that? So this was kind of the project research and comparison that we did for the Acton Boxborough project. We have not as of yet been able to contact the Lexington people to get some of their input, but there is some information. Operations and maintenance budget forecasting. So what we did is create this chart to kind of capture the existing building systems operating and maintenance costs for the year, what our air source systems would cost with the geotherm, and then what the electric systems would cost, and then PV generation. And then we kind of came up with some totals. So across the top, we have existing building systems for the year 2022. So operating costs are roughly $98,000. That's in electric and gas. The maintenance costs were surprisingly $1,813 for a total of about $100,000 for the year annually. Our HVAC systems for the air source, central air source heat pump, operating costs just for these electrically would be about $123,000. Maintenance costs are budgeted at the committee's request for about $38,700. Maintenance contracts, filter changes, et cetera. Some of the things that were discussed as part of the sustainability subcommittee was facilities director asked about how much they could do. So that's kind of the unknown at this point as to what would be outsourced versus done in-house. So the total for that annual cost would be about $161,000. Now, as Marty mentioned earlier, HVAC systems for the geothermal component obviously have less operating costs. The maintenance costs are going to be less, and the total annual costs are obviously less at $136,000. Then we add in our electrical systems operating and maintenance. So our electrical systems are going to include the lighting, the security, the technologies, the plug loads, things that'll be plugged in, anything and everything associated with electrical other than the HVAC. So for that, we're estimating at $96,000 for operating costs and about $8,000 a year for maintenance costs, for a total of $104,000. Then we have the line item for the PV roof generation at this point, $10,200. And based on that note, that's the year one projected savings that would grow to approximately $386,000 over the 20-year term. That will be updated once we start receiving the information from Select for the additional full offset information, whether it be an additional canopy in the front or ground mounts in the open field areas. So that's kind of the unknown at this point. We'll update that accordingly. But when you look at the total air source or total geothermal building towards the bottom, right, your operating costs, including the electrical costs, would be about $219,000. And then your maintenance costs, as you project down, would be $9,813. I'll have to check that number. I don't believe that's right. I think the cell might have gotten corrupt, because the geotherm is going to be slightly less at $213 for the electric load and the geothermal electric load. And then your maintenance would be $26,900. So if I did quick math, the total air source building maintenance costs would be approximately $46,000, $47,000, not just $9,800. Okay, questions on that HVAC utility cost chart? So when we looked at this, you're looking at for an all-electric system, roughly in the $18,000 to $20,000 a year annual electric and operating costs or maintenance costs. The geothermal would be slightly less. And what we did was we created this bottom chart as the control with the estimated, if you were to go with a gas HVAC system, and then the electric utility costs annually. So you can see the existing building system for 2022 is the same, $98,000 for operating and about $1,800 for maintenance. Where you see the savings in the HVAC systems for a gas HVAC system would be about close to $100,000, maintenance costs, $19,800. And then we just transferred the electrical costs, those would be the same for your plug loads, your lighting, your equipment at $96,000. So for a gas HVAC system, your total operating costs are about $196,000 and your maintenance costs roughly $28,000. Again, these don't include the PV generation offsets at this point. We would subtract that from any one of these systems to get your total costs. So that kind of gives you an idea of the comparisons for the different systems. Again, the only unknown would be how much roof or ground source PV generation we could add to offset the cost of the electricity, no matter what system you go to. Questions on the chart? Okay. So now we get into the Maynard Sustainability Committee letter. We've provided some bullet points as to a response. These are kind of moving targets, if you will, and will continue to be updated as additional information continues to reveal itself. So net zero
Chris,
ready. I'm
Chris,
sorry,
I'll
go
just
ahead,
jump in real quick. So the thought, so we spoke about this at one of the recent working group meetings, and the thought was to kind of present to you all what our initial draft responses are, have a dialogue with you all if you feel like it's necessary, but then ultimately package up the response and get a formal response back to the Maynard Sustainability Committee. So that's the point of kind of going through it with you guys. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Phil. So Net Zero Energy Ready provided a report from preliminary energy modeling that indicates achievement of net zero ready performance. That report should be accompanied by a description of assumptions as well as inputs used as placeholders in the energy model. So energy modeling is typically done and performed during the design development phase once we have a better idea of the specific equipment and other items. And that's done in conjunction with the lead certification process. It's not done during the schematic design process in a typical fashion. So question number 2 is avoiding toxic materials. Describe the design team's strategy to prevent red list materials from being used in the project and identify members of the design team or engaged consultants.
Chris, one second. Ken has a question.
Ken, question on number 1.
Yeah, Chris. So the energy modeling, so you're saying it's not done.
Never done during schematic.
Well, then
Well,
I don't
we do.
exist.
No, what I
this
mean is that,
this is so we saw some numbers before about your predicted energy use. So that's some kind of energy model, right? So there's been something done to calculate this. And also this would be how we use the energy modeling. It's good to use it to verify, but I think the real value in it and the reason why it's worthwhile having a consultant like Green Engineer on board is to use that to help guide the process and inform the design. So it seems like that would be a good value for the town here. If we can incorporate that service and benefit to the process and to really support the design team here in these decisions.
Yeah, so it sounds like MVG is not saying it's not going to happen. It happens at DD where they better understand materials being specified.
yeah, we don't know what system it is yet, so the energy model is based on the system, so you'd have to do several.
Right.
So I mean, which one are we going to pick? So it's when the system is selected, that is when the energy model begins. Can you correct me if I'm wrong on this, Marty?
No, we do the preliminary life cycle cost analysis at the schematic design, and then
right.
The energy modeling happens at the DD phase.
Yeah, and Ken, if you remember during the sustainability subcommittee meetings, Anthony Hardman from the Green Engineer did participate to help provide some basic information, but we had not done any energy modeling per se. He was providing some historical data just on questions that were raised as part of those meetings. But we had not done, nor is it required to do the energy model as part of the schematic design process.
Okay.
But it does get done starting with design development.
Okay, and then we can home in a little better on the predictions of energy use. So we should probably then take these predictions of energy use with a bit of a grain of salt, right? Because we haven't really dug into the model at this point.
Well,
That's fair enough.
I wouldn't say it's a grain of salt, maybe 2 grains of salt, but it's you have to make some prediction, Ken.
Yeah.
We use that based on historical information, our experience, our engineers' experience, what's happening out there, what we expect for the energy usage in a building. So we can make it's sort of like, I was a mathematics major in college before I became an architect, and one of the most important things you can learn is estimating. By estimating, I mean you have a very complex formula with all kinds of variables and invariables. But if you don't know where you're going, you have to be able to judge it and estimate so that when you do the calculations, you know you're in the ballpark to begin with. But that's all and so we do that, and that's what's done by prescription in designing buildings, before you have a system selected, is you're estimating based on historical information for the various systems.
Okay.
But you can't make a decision on it until you have the system itself. We all try to, bring us down to a mathematical formula, but that would be nice if we could do that. But my daughter's a mathematician too. So we talk with formulas and so that we kind of understand each other in some ways.
We got one more question. Meg?
Yeah, I'm from the Sustainability Committee, and I just wanted to clarify the point of the question, which I think Ken's getting at, is that, you know, in order to make informed decisions about the systems, we just want to have a real clarity on the energy assumptions or estimates that we're able to make now.
Okay.
Right. And so including issues around net zero ready. I mean, the previous conversation discussed things like, you know, going backwards and putting in some kind of fossil fuel boiler. And then 20 years later, when things are more efficient, supposedly, right? Or there's no incentives or what have you, who knows what conditions exist, right? Then we put in some other electrified system. Well, that's a really hard thing to predict, right? So maybe we just wanted a clear picture of this performance metric now. And I think you guys are getting there. I've seen some nice, you know, estimates that include the incentives and other things that we think are relevant. So I just wanted to clarify the reason for the question, right? I understand that there are more accurate estimates made later when systems are more fully defined.
Well, an energy model is a rather involved, process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, which system do we do the energy model for? So you have you're going to have 4 or 5 energy models and then compare them. So that's what I mean. And, my experience with these energy models, they're about, $30,000-$40,000 each. So it's not something that you do at schematic because it's pretty involved. And it's over time that they work with the model, and then we can work with the model as well.
Yeah.
So I'm confused as to why we would be considering this unless you're ready to spend that for the models.
Okay, I guess I'm confused as to why you would say it's never done. My company does energy modeling, and we do it at the schematic side phase, and we do several iterations and test out different systems. And it's typically it's not free for sure, but
right.
No, on the order of maybe 15,000-20,000 to do several iterations of different types of systems.
Okay, I think that's good. What is your company?
It's Building Evolution Corporation.
And okay, great. Keep that in mind. I mean, I'm certainly open for it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, but I would say my experience also in doing things like if we're doing an Appendix G, a DO2 model, that's not the right tool for the schematic phase. We would use a different tool. But I think we're getting lost. I don't want to lose everybody here. We're getting lost a bit in the semantics, but it's ways of estimating, and we really want to make sure that we know what we're using to make the decisions. And if we're saying we have some calculations, but we know we're going to get better calculations later, I think that's fine. We just need to be upfront about that.
Well, like for an example, if we're in consideration at least 3 systems that would have to be estimated pretty carefully or modeled, if you will. How long does that take?
My guy can do that in about a week.
Yeah, I'd have to check with Anthony over at the Green Engineer. I know he had mentioned a time frame, and it wasn't a week. It was a few weeks, but I'd have to get that from him.
Well, why don't we get a proposal? And Marty, you're going to have to help us write it and bring it before the committee.
So here's the problem. I see that Justine's got her hand up, and I want to have her speak, but and I'm not against what you're saying, Ken, but my background, and I've been an energy engineer for 40 some odd years now. Not that that's good or bad, but the modeling.
Yeah, but it seems like a lot longer, right, Jerry?
It really does, yes. Oh, God, yes. But the modeling is usually done during design development. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't model. And I'm just going to make a quick statement, say, if anybody wants to do this, that's fine. We can do it during this, and it's just money. Where that money is going to come from to pay to get the 3 different models done right now, I don't know, because it's not free. That's all. Justine.
I kind of, I agree with you, Jerry. I think that, well, I think we're going to get lost in the weeds. We're going to get into the weeds with this. And I think that my feeling from the Sustainability Committee and their letters are that they are trying to push us in certain directions, which is fine. You know, I'm not opposed to stretching a little bit, but my concern is that we're going to basically be paralyzed and be unable to make a decision because there are so many possibilities that, you know, that have all these different options. And ultimately, we as the building committee just have to decide, as the building committee that is representing the town and that is building this building, what we're going to go forward with. And I think that keeps getting lost in all of this conversation. And I just needed to get that out there again, because I am very concerned about the cost. And, you know, I mean, I have said it from day one. I've said it several times since. I said it to the MSBA. I said it to Frank at the interviews. I mean, this is very concerning to me. So when we keep going back and forth going, well, we could do this, but we might do this. Well, how about this? We need to just make a decision, own it, and move forward.
Thank you, Justine. Very good.
Meg, you got a question?
Yeah, no, just to respond to that briefly, I think the Sustainability Committee wants to keep it simple and doesn't want to try to get into the weeds. So I'm just trying to clarify. And one of the questions that we have is the ability to make it clear, right, to the public who will be voting on this, right, and the cost, right, to make it clear what the cost comes down to and where it's coming from, right? And that includes cost of operation. And so that was well illustrated in the discussion around the HVAC, right? If we look at the total cost to operate and run this building over time, you know, the sustainability aspects that we're interested in don't look necessarily as bad as some may believe. And we want to make sure that comes out clearly in our communications to the public. And so that's why a lot of our asks in this letter are around messaging and making those points very plain, because none of us can be experts in all the aspects of these buildings. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay. All right, Chris.
Okay. So item number 2 was the toxic materials and identify members of the design team or consultants with living building challenge program experience or credentials, and do we review red list materials? So currently, the project is not pursuing the living building challenge, but will meet many of the requirement criteria through the LEED Gold certification process, including, you know, responsible water use, energy and carbon reduction, healthy interior performance, and responsible materials, to name just a few. If the school building committee, it's up to them to determine if a red list materials review is needed. Again, that would be an additional service. We would engage a consultant with that experience. But when we looked at the original list, it seems that the LEED Gold certification is meeting a lot of that criteria. So that's kind of the crux of item number 2. Any questions? Okay. Item number 3, fossil fuel free regular operation. As discussed in our sustainability subcommittee meetings, currently the regular operation of the building does not include fossil fuel use. Instead, we'll incorporate all electric building system and equipment through the central heat pump. We talked to our kitchen consultant, and electrical kitchen equipment, things of that nature, are available and are planned for this building at this point. The emergency generator will utilize fossil fuel, typically in the form of diesel. There'll be an on-site tank. We will not have a hardline pipe system. It could also be propane if so desired. Item number 4 is to minimize upfront carbon and demonstrate that the project's upfront carbon costs in terms of embodied carbon impact offsets the impact of continuing to operate the current facility. Right, obtain a proposal from a qualified consultant for analysis of carbon accounting. That includes estimation of the project's upfront carbon, including emissions associated with producing construction materials and transporting those materials to the site, assembling them in the finished building, as well as carbon impact of operating a new facility. The proposed analysis shall compare the new building's upfront carbon emissions plus projected emissions from 10 years of operation to 10 years from 10 years of operating the existing facility. So the design team's energy model, the green engineer was asked to provide a proposal during the fall. At this stage, design team might identify other consultants to provide this service. So once again, under the LEED Gold certification process, and one of the things I did touch on, the materials and resources into your environment credits will demonstrate efforts in reducing the upfront embodied carbon emission impacts, right? Select the materials that take less carbon to produce. The plants and materials, raw materials may be closer to the project site within 500 miles, et cetera. So we're not transporting them across the country. But the school building committee will be the ones to determine if projected carbon emissions review is required. Again, that would be an additional service during the design development phase. So there was a question about the green engineer providing possibly providing a proposal. That was never formally voted, I believe, and that would be coming from the full building committee. And at this point, we just haven't done that. So if the committee does determine that they would like to pursue that, to compare the existing school with 10 years of operation, the new school, et cetera, that could be done during the design development phase.
Nick, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, the goal of this exercise, is this to illustrate to the town that it's worth it to build a new school? Because I'm dangerously concerned that this is going to say, well, if we kept the school, it would cost us way less money. Like, I don't know how this, or that should not cost us less money. It should be less impactful to the environment. But I also don't know how you project 10 years of operation of a building and all the materials you have to put in it to maintain it and the carbon of those. I mean, it's like the old story of, if you have a hammer and you replace the handle and you replace the head, is it still the same hammer? I mean, you're going to replace all the parts of a building. A lot of it, I should say, not the structure, but so there's two parts of my issues here is what is the tool that this is for, and how do you maintain accuracy for the projection of the 10 years of the existing school? I don't even know who this question is really for, to be honest with you.
Ken, you want to speak to it?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question there. So, and there's a lot of things in there, Nick, so you're going to have to coach me along here. So the carbon emissions for 10 years of operations, that's pretty straightforward, right? We already have predictions of what the building is going to use to operate. And you just
that's your energy consumption you're talking about, right?
Sorry?
You're talking about energy consumption, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Why would it matter? I guess that, and I don't know, Nick, is that your question kind of?
So
sorry to jump in.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
I think if we have this and it's done what we expect it to show, what is the end result? Like, is it a tool to show the town or somebody that, okay, 10 years of the existing school is going to be at, 50, whatever number units, will make it up. And 10 years of the new school is going to be at 30, but we spent 40 energy credits to get to it. So it's worse, whatever you want to try and call our qubits of measurement.
Yeah.
That's where I think I'm stuck on is what are we getting to measure against? And I understand you're talking about peeling away the layers of, okay, yeah, energy use, that's an easy one. That's A and B. I totally get it. But when you're talking about embodied carbon of the project, we know what we're putting in for a new building. It's a little harder, I think, to assume for the existing building embodied carbon of replacement materials and other things that go on.
Right. So you look at just the operation, because you've already sunk that into the existing building. So this is really about, for people that are looking to make sure that this school building is going to reduce impact, lower carbon, and that it's done in a smart way. Right. So if we went to make a zero energy building, pat ourselves on the back, but we use 50 years worth of emissions in the construction of it, we've gone backwards. Right. So that's what this is about in a nutshell.
Well, what kind of recommendations would come that we may not even know about, that would come from a study like this that would do that? Because we're already pretty efficient through the LEED program. We're going LEED Gold, that the whole
Right.
section on which materials you're using, recyclable materials. All of our steel is recycled materials. So we're doing quite a bit already. And would they make recommendations to go further than what LEED Gold requires?
Well, I'm not sure who they is. I think we're looking to the design team to lead on this.
Well, we thought we were.
So they would be you.
Oh. So,
Right,
but
so-
we don't have that expertise, so we have to get
Okay.
a consultant to do it.
Yeah, so, but you could, but in a sense, still wrapping that in under the umbrella of Mount Vernon Group here. So I want to back up and say, so we don't get lost in the weeds here. It looks like there's, as Chris had pointed out, looking at materials and resources, where they come from, the focus there, that might be about all we can get for this project. I know there are consultants that do dive into how do we lower the upfront carbon, and Frank can answer, it would be probably concrete is the most significant area where we have impact, right? So it would be looking at the efficiency of the concrete and the structural design. So
We never use it. We never use concrete. We're pretty exclusively steel.
all right, so
And,
your foundations are made of wood?
No, I said we don't use
Right.
it as an overall structural system. Of course, it's a concrete.
Yeah. Right, so there's a
footing
lot of
and
things that can be done even with the footings in terms of their design to increase the efficiency of the concrete there. So just to answer your question, that would be an example of something that would come out of it. Insulation materials, are there, could we use a cellulose in place of a foam product in one location? Yeah, that would be another example.
Yeah. Well, we always look at that in terms of cost. We have to, as you know, we have to reach certain R values, U values for our walls, for our roof assemblies. Now, for example, you take a roof assembly, we look at all kinds of ways of doing it, but we have to meet certain energy criteria as well as performance criteria.
Right.
Cellulose, they used to use that a lot. There was a thing called Tectum that half the schools in Massachusetts used, and it's a great product. It was really cheap. They used to throw up schools overnight, except when water got on it. Cellulose is not a really good thing to be putting around at roofs, especially. So, I mean, I don't want to get into an argument. There's always new ideas coming. We try to stay up with it. We try to make an efficient building and a sustainable building. I've been involved in sustainability since I started architectural school. That's all we talked about. And we're still there. Something new comes along, new consultants come along with new ideas, and we have to incorporate that in the overall. We're generalists as architects. So when you focus on one or two items like that and say, somehow we're not doing a good enough job. And I'm willing to accept that, but I think on the other hand, you have to be reasonable too about looking at everything. Our structural engineer would make that decision in terms of how foundations are made. As an architect, I don't feel capable and competent of saying, I think we can save some concrete here if we do this without blessing from the structural engineer. And
I don't think anybody's saying that. This is suggesting, and it probably coming from LEED itself.
Yes.
That the structural engineer, this is integrated design, they're part of the team, and they're going to look at what's their role to play and how can they help support your goals.
We have regular sustainability meetings all the time, and I'll bring it up with them.
Yeah.
We're always, and again, this sort of decision takes place during design development. It may affect cost too, and we don't want to be adding cost. So at this early stage, but if we can save money and save energy at the same time, that would be the ideal situation.
Yeah.
But incorporating new strategies to do stuff after the fact is not really responsible as far as I'm concerned. You know, we have quite a task, and there's a lot going on in the environmental movement and where we're going with it. And I think our schools, you know, we're always saving energy, saving usage. Indoor air quality is just as important as saving, you know, energy use during construction. I mean, so there are just so many factors that come into it that we look at. But we'll be happy to look at it. It sounds like a design development thing. And if we can find new systems that substitution that are, you know, less expensive or equally expensive and they make sense, we certainly incorporate them.
And I think, and Meg tried to speak to this before, this is really about helping the team here. And by team, I mean that the whole school building committee help prepare how we're going to make the case and convince people in town that this is being done in a smart way. So here's an example of how it's done. I think, Chris, you laid out some good things with the LEED standard, and probably it's, you know, highlighting those kind of points and how materials and resources factors in and achieves those goals. That might be a better way than going through a carbon accounting analysis. I don't know enough about the current LEED standard to say that, but so if there's a better way of doing it, let's do it. But let's make sure that the word gets out about what the team is doing.
I was only worried on a big picture that this was going to compare us to the existing school and was going to point backwards, like you said, like raise questions of why we're not renovating. That's where I thought that this was rooted in. It doesn't sound like that, so I'm a little less worried. And also I thought it was supposed to be so specific that we're talking about all of the carbon that goes into the existing school, not just the energy. And I was like, how do you do that? We don't know if the roof's going to need to be replaced or whatever. And it sounds like we're not being that granular, and I'm okay. I retract some of my initial concern with this question leading me down a rabbit hole of so many other questions. So it sounds like it's a little less, like I said, granular.
I'm going to jump in. I got some people saying they got to get going soon. So if we could go quicker. Jerry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. We've got to move on from this. I don't mind the debate on it, and it's got to be considered, but I know how many numbered things are in this presentation, and we're not halfway done yet.
Yep.
Okay, so item number 5, cross-laminated timber, convey the structural engineer's assessment of feasibility and implications of cross-laminated timber as a structural system for the project, provide a preliminary cost estimate. So currently our construction classification is type 1B construction. It's pretty strict. The initial review was cross-laminated timber in use. Type 1B construction would have limited use as roof system framing. Given the fact that we have composite concrete floor decks, etc. This is the location. High-strength steel offers more framing span, versatility, and flexibility, which we need in our, creating large classroom spaces, open spaces. Typically more reliable and cost effective, and then you have your lower insurance costs for the building as a whole. The use of CLT, if it's not used throughout the entire building, would result in having 2 framing systems, which indeed are going to incur additional costs from a contractor standpoint, and bringing in the appropriate people for both structural steel and cross-laminated timber. Item number 6 is minimize treated water conveyed to the site to provide options and preliminary cost estimates for rainwater collection and reuse. Point to sections of the schematic design package that highlight water conserving inside plumbing strategy, as well as planned nature-based solutions and landscaping that will minimize need for imported water use outside the building and maximize replenishment of the water table. So speaking with our plumbing engineer, rainwater collection use for interior plumbing system will require a separate plumbing system and a large storage tank. That storage tank is going to require, both systems require regular maintenance, right? So they'll have pumps to pump the water to the fixtures, because that rainwater is captured on the roof. It's then brought down to an underground or above ground tank, typically 10,000 gallons or more. And then that water in the tank needs to be sanitized, disinfected, have a dye added. Pumps will need to connect it to the generator in case power goes out. We still need to access and flush toilets and urinals and such. And that's going to add additional costs to the project. There is a reduced effectiveness during extended minimal rain periods. So, as you think about the global warming this past summer where we had water restrictions, there was very little rainwater that could affect that use. And the sanitizing and disinfectant dye adding, that's an ongoing maintenance issue, because as water is added to the tank and then exported out to the fixtures, that new water constantly has to be dealt with. The project is designed with low flow water saving fixtures. So I believe in checking with our plumbing engineer and talking with Arnell at the last meeting, our fixture flow rate's like 1.2 gallons and change. Low flow starts at 1.6, but it's obviously gotten a lot better. So we plan on using very low flow water saving fixtures. We incorporate and can incorporate things like electronic eyes so that they're only turned on and off when there's somebody there using them. The landscape will not include an irrigation system to help save water, and it will consist of native low maintenance plantings and natural vegetation to make sure that the site does not require maintenance or very little of it, if so. Item number 7, resilience in extreme weather events. During the public forum, there was some vocal concern about the building not operating as a shelter. Provide communication from town public safety departments explaining why this building is not selected to function as an emergency shelter, and then provide a narrative explaining how the proposed design will be able to function as a heating or cooling center during power outages or extreme weather events. Include explanation of the difference between emergency shelter and a center. So we did reach out to both the police and fire chiefs. They have indicated that the new school need not be designed as an emergency shelter. I believe the Fowler School currently exists as one. That correspondence has been provided to the school building committee. Designated areas of the new building will be used for heating and cooling center use and connected to the emergency generator circuit. So during those extreme events during the winter or summer, when the school is opened up either to have residents come in and warm or cool, those designated areas are usually public areas, the gym, the cafetorium. There will be some minor connections to obviously the toilet rooms for use during those events, etc. A shelter requires additional areas and features for sleeping, showering, and eating needs. We don't have any showering facilities in the elementary school. They're usually not provided. They do happen to exist at the middle school. There is structural framing seismic code implications to meet additional seismic loads and not only hurricane, but tornado loads. There is a life safety code requirement, increase impact. If you're going to have the shelter used as a sleeping environment, now there's carbon monoxide and some other requirements. This all results in a larger generator and a runtime increase. So I believe there's a minimum of 72 hours as a shelter, and usually requires dual fuel capabilities. So not only a tank for either diesel or propane, but hard pipe systems so that it can run continuously without, I think one resident or somebody brought up the fact that, well, during those events, everybody's going to be looking for fuel to operate generators. That's where the dual fuel use capabilities comes in. So you don't have to rely on deliveries for that continuous operation during those long events, if you will. That does add costs to the project. Financial implications of net zero energy schools, arrange public meeting featuring presentations from representatives, neighboring communities, and present to the select board, including finance, school committee, and other boards that would be impacted. And when documenting the process of selecting design directions to the public, use life cycle cost analysis with a 30-year term to match the municipal bond funding. So this would be a decision for the school building committee to discuss and arrange public meetings if deemed necessary. There is some clarification. I'm not sure if it was in here, it might have been, but one of the questions came about the Lexington schools achieving net zero. One of them did not achieve a net zero energy kind of designation. The bonding duration would be determined by the town. That would be based on their best rates and longevity, et cetera. life cycle costs are typically coordinated with the 20 to 25-year lifespan of equipment. So that's why it's not gone out to 30. It's typically 20 years, but there may be some equipment that can get up to 25. And then leveraging incentives, provide a summary of mass save and Inflation Reduction Act incentives that design team will pursue in the project and how they impact cost viability measures, including the design. So we've looked at the mass save with Eversource, incorporated their incentives as well as the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. That's all been captured as part of the HVAC life cycle cost analysis for the various systems that you saw on one of the very first slides that Marty presented. And then anticipating applicable energy codes, document the conformance to the new stretch energy code and outline the project to meet the opt-in provisions for the mass stretch energy code. So as required with any project, the project will meet the latest building energy stretch codes in force at the time of the anticipated permit and documented in the contract documents. So we do basically a code review sheet that documents all that information, anticipating permitting in 2024-25. We're looking at the very least the 2021 code. We'll design to that, and if it does get updated in the process, that's what we will look to adapt. When it comes time to permit, that latest code must be met. And to the best of our knowledge, currently the town of Maynard has not adapted the opt-in provisions of the mass stretch energy code. So those are kind of the responses to the sustainability committee letter, draft copy. They'll be issued to the school building committee, and then those can be discussed and how to move forward. I would think that some of these, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, would also be included in the frequently asked questions that get put
100%.
together.
Yeah, Mary, you got a question?
No, more of a comment. Chris, thank you so much for doing all this. This must have taken quite an amount of time. So very much appreciated that you addressed each one of them.
Yes.
You're welcome.
great.
That was the efforts of the design team, the OPM, and our consultants.
So the next item we were going to go over, I'm sorry, Justine, you got.
Just one other comment. I know that part of the feedback I had heard from someone was that the initial letter that they hadn't, that the sustainability hadn't heard back regarding the initial letter. And when we had gone over it in the working group, that basically the I think it was the 4 items they had in that had been met. So I think that that's something that's important to highlight as well, just because I know we didn't do it. I know we didn't do it with these slides, but I think that that's important to acknowledge also.
Thank you, Justine. So Justine's referring to a letter from the Sustainability Committee back on June 21st of last year, 4 items. And like she said, we've essentially attacked each of them. So we'll input that in our response. Meg?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys going through these item by item. And I just want to point out that a big part of what the point of this letter was to help us find the pieces of this in the schematic design that we can pull out easily and message, because a part of our work is to tell the community, where these pieces are in the project, right? And so, of course, not everybody understands every little detail, but we want it to be an easy thing to point to. So that's a big part of what we're asking for here. So thank you so much for putting this here. And I hope we can work together to point those things out in the schematic design as we try to shop it around and show people where we're at with the project.
So the last item is received an email from the select board chair. So the email kind of had 3 topics. One of the topics was sustainability. So we covered that pretty well tonight. So the next couple topics, one is soil export concerns and unsuitable soils and soil mitigation. So we got a slide here for that. And then construction site access, construction logistics, and we'll speak to that. So go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so soil mitigation, we had taken during the initial feasibility study, PDP and PSR phases, several borings in the locations of where either a ad reno option would go or a new school option, as you can see on the graphics here. So there were several borings taken in the proposed new building location, right? I've got samples of some of those, indicate some topsoil, subsoils, and sand. So that's the fill that's likely not able to support the building would have to be removed, and then we'd have to replace it with structural fill. So those appropriate quantities of either unsuitable or, unstable excavation replacements will be included in the schematic design estimate budget. So we've given this, our geotechnical engineer has provided information that's been forwarded to the civil engineer, right? And they're doing, based on our proposed grading of the new project, how much cut and fill would need to be ascertained. Then those quantities are included to the estimators to say, okay, we think we need, X amount of cubic yards of fill removed and replaced with structural fill in these locations. And that also applies to the ledge that was found on site, right? So there's areas of ledge, as we all know. And in speaking with our geotech engineer, we've come up with a quantity based again on what our proposed grading would be and the depths that or visual references that are found on site, and anticipated, okay, we think we're comfortable in including this in our schematic design borings. Now, that will continue through design development, where we will take additional borings now that we have a permanent solution with a new building location. The site has been developed with roads, etc. We will take additional borings during that design development phase, and any new information, whether it regards to ledge or fill, will be included in those estimates. Through that process, there will be an additional estimate for the various phases, 60%, 90%. Make sure everything continually gets updated with information, so we know where we are with our budget, because that's the important goal with any project, is protecting that budget from feasibility on through to the bid phase. So we'll continue to update that information as we go along. And then one of the last
Hold on, Chris. Chris
Yep.
Arsenal has his hand raised. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey guys, thanks everybody. I think there's some confusion here, Chris LeBlanc, because it seems you're addressing a few different items of my concern kind of simultaneously, but it's not really addressing any of them at the same time either. So my largest concern and my number one bullet point on this was the large quantities of soil that would need to be disturbed, managed, and potentially shipped off site for disposal. What's the total volume of soil that you're anticipating to remove from the site?
Chris, I'd have to get that information for you.
I heard a number of 35,000 tons. Is that at all accurate?
I don't recall. Let me see if I can pull up an estimate.
I thought I thought the estimators were using a cut and fill number that was already predetermined.
They were, and I'm going to look now.
If I could add to that too. The geotechnical engineer is not sure what percentage of this that we're taking, removable soils are actually organic. So contractors now are amending the soil to cut down on the number of trucks that are going in and out of the site, where they can amend the soil pretty easily by on-site with on-site materials. So that reduces that. They do take a risk at doing that, but it's always an option to them. We just had a recent project where we had looked at the geotechnical engineer said 25,000 cubic yards of fill material would have to be removed. When the contractor finally got on site, he took it upon themselves to amend the existing soils with support using geopiers and other devices, and met the compaction and sieve tests and all the tests that are required for suitable subsurface for buildings. So the early estimates are usually pretty conservative until you get it to the contractors, and as we go further in the design, we may get some idea that some of that could be amended rather than removed.
Soil use is always a great idea, but I'm going to correct you in one thing, Frank. It's not
Sure.
the contractor taking the risk on reusing soils. It's really us taking the risk, because if
No.
those soils are not well conditioned for geotechnical
Excuse
purposes.
me, you didn't understand what I said.
No,
We still put in whatever amount of yards we think. The contractor is responsible for meeting the structural requirements of the soils.
Mhm.
But what they do is they take risks themselves. The total risk is on them. The contract documents require them to do that.
Mhm.
If they think by examining the borings and going down that they can amend it, we allow them to do that. You see, and so the savings comes on their bid price. That's the risk I'm talking about. See, they come in,
Yeah.
and the particular project I was talking about, they were in, a couple of $1 million under the next low bidder.
Mhm.
So that was, and one of the reasons for that was they took a risk to say we can amend the soil and get that thing by not doing all those truckloads. And
You
that
are
was-
absolutely correct that soil reuse is going to be our friend on this project.
Yes,
There's no question about that. Now,
I'm a
but the-
total
but-
believer in that. Yeah,
But the challenge is that we're just not talking about the soil under the building footprint. We're talking about the soils that we need to cut away from the hillside itself.
right. the
So
cut
it's a
and fill.
large quantity of soils.
Yeah.
And right now, Mass DEP has called this moment in time a soil disposal crisis. So, and this is in 2019 where we could dispose of these typical types of soils, these non-hazardous typical soils for $30 a ton.
Yep.
Where my teams and other teams around the greater Boston area are looking for typical non-hazardous soil disposal the next couple of years to be well over $100 a ton. I have a couple committees that are working with Mass DEP. They're estimating in the high $100, $180, $200 range a ton. So it's really a cost thing to try to drive down the disposal of soils. And so when I see a 35,000 or I hear a 35,000 ton number, or I see designs that have a lot of soil to manage, particularly soils that are in or near an area that has a former Mass DEP site, that's going to be concerning for the soil disposal facilities. It's just, I see cost all over the place with that. So that's why my advice in my email back in October was to really get ahead of this, to understand what the soil management plan is so that we could really reduce our risk and our cost exposure for this
And I
project.
agree with you.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yes, it does. And I think this is a practice we're going to have about a year to do after the project is voted, because it takes about a year to put the full set of documents together.
Mhm.
So during that period, we have to look at that. At this point, we can discuss this with our geotech engineer and look at some possible options. We're already looking at maybe doing some modification to where we're actually placing the building and using some reuse of some fill and using less ledge removal and so forth. So we are looking at options of reducing cost, but I don't think we're at a point where we can tell you exactly what we're going to do. All I can say is that we have to cover the risk of the owner. And that is that if they can't amend the soil, then they have to replace it with structural fill. And the way Mass bid laws work is we show that as a baseline, because we know that will work. But we've seen how the contractors now, they're willing to take risk. That's what they can do. They are responsible for creating the subsurface that we require according to the geotechnical engineer. So there's many ways to do it. So we're going to keep investigating and do more. As Chris said, a lot more borings are taken during the DD phase, and that's what we should be able to pick up some more information at that time.
Chris LeBlanc, did you find that, did you find that soil volume yet?
Chris, I did not. I don't have that part of the spec.
So
with me.
my next big concern, and Phil, this really is important.
I'm not cutting you off, Chris. I gotta clarify this. 35,000 tons is a number that was just thrown out. We don't know if that's accurate. I want that on the record. 1, 2, we haven't had the estimate reconciliation meeting yet. So what happens a lot of times is you have two estimators producing unreconciled estimates. So they both have estimates off of quantities that are differing. So the massive value to a reconciliation meeting is to get that differing value sorted out. And then as well as the other massive part of reconciliation is going through a value engineering process and understanding how we can revise grading and finish floor elevation of the building so we can reduce soil export. So that effort is forthcoming. It hasn't happened yet. I want people to know that.
That does make sense to me. And I hope that gets reconciled soon. I saw a March or April date. So thank you.
Yeah.
My next large concern is site access, construction, logistics, and things of that nature. When's the last time you guys done a site walk out in this, behind that, the Green Meadow and the field back there?
Oh, what are you getting at?
I'm asking when you guys have walked the site of the current proposed building location.
Yes.
For me, it was
I'm asking when was that? Was that recently or
Chris?
before the chosen
This-
design?
this past fall.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So you probably saw what I saw, which was a very close site that's bordered on three sides by wilderness in a sense, and a school in front of it. And I look at this site and I look at a lot of site designs, and it's unclear to me how we're going to manage site logistics and access, particularly if we're going to need to move, large tons of soil from the site. So my concern is, how are we going to get trucks in and out of that site location? and
Christopher,
control access?
Can I ask, what is your background?
Civil engineering, mechanical engineering, site design, site plan.
Are you a contractor or?
I oversee construction of institutional buildings at Harvard.
Okay, great. So, what I'm saying is that we have done our firm, and I've been involved in about 60 or 70 public school buildings in Massachusetts. All of them have these site logistics. You have a very large and easily attainable separation site, which we will provide documents for that, where we have separation of construction vehicles and parking with the users' vehicles and pedestrians as well. So we will work that through. I mean, this is a big site. I mean, we're doing a site in Lawrence right now. It's a 5-story building with no site around it. As a matter of fact, the play area is on the roof. So, and we still have to do the logistics for that. So there are many, many different sites that we've worked with. That's all I can tell you. I don't have the answer right now, but I feel very confident that the size of this site tells me that we'll find a way to do it. And the contract, if we have to give them, tell them that they're staging for certain things or offsite, we do that too. If they have to put their trailers somewhere, we'll show them where they're going to put them and how we keep the school functioning. That's the main thing. And the top priority is safety.
And the reason I bring it up is that for the committee, challenging site conditions, from my point of view, just are dollar signs. It means that the contractor needs a bid higher for their site logistics. If they don't have parking nearby, if they don't have good laydown areas, if they don't have their own gate that they can man, if they have concerns about safety, all of it just adds to the bidding cost itself. So that's my concern.
But
obviously,
why would you think we don't have room to do that? I'm saying this is a very generous site. As I said,
I think there's room for laydown and things of that nature. I have no idea where we're going to have a site access road. That's my big concern.
Well, I think you'll be satisfied when we come up with that.
Okay.
Because
good.
Yeah, so
much more.
I hope I am satisfied on that, Frank.
Well, I don't know if you will be, but we'll certainly try it.
I hope so.
All I can tell you is that we've done much more difficult sites than this. And I can say that from experience. That's all I can say at this point.
Okay.
So if I could add to that, what we're going to do, Chris, is we are in the process of working on site logistics and access. We'll develop a plan. That plan will be coordinated with the phasing of the school, new school, demolition, et cetera. When we get that initial draft plan, we're going to talk to the public safety leaders in town, police, fire, make sure they're good with it, how they access it, how they have to respond to any issues that go on. We'll run it by the school administration to make sure it doesn't interfere with, the operation of their existing school. And we'll fine tune it. And that won't be the final aspect of it, right? It'll be part of our bid documents. Here's our layout, and then we'll review that with the contractor. And if it has to get adjusted through the different phases.
If I could, right there, there's where the difference is. This is chapter 149. We don't know who the contractor is. And one thing I've learned about contractors, they're really smart. And so we put in our separation plan that's all approved within the community. Everybody, including yourself, Chris, I hope would come on board or add to it or make suggestions so we can put this on the documents. And the reason for that is that we get a cost that's included. Now, just about every single project we've done, that whichever contractor has a different way of how he wants to approach or she wants to approach the project. So they come up with and say, well, could we take a look at how you're doing this? So we allow them to come up with other plans, and a lot of times they're more efficient than what we're showing, but it still has to go through the approval process locally of all the users. Everybody's including yourself, will sign off on it and say, this is good, this is better, because see, each contractor approaches it a little differently. And that's how they put their bids together, just like the amending of soils and other things like that. So that's what we deal with all the time. So we put things in that work that are approved locally so that we have something for them to bid on. And we own that. If we don't like what they propose, they have to do it the way it's shown. And sometimes that happens too. So I just want to let you know that we're pretty familiar with how to go about it. I'm not an expert on it. I'm not a civil engineer, so I respect where you're coming from. But I would say that my experience is to show a way that would work, that's approved locally, and then allow the contractors to make modifications if the committee and the community agrees with them. And usually they're not major changes. They're just things that they see as a better way to set up the site or something like that.
So my takeaway on all this is really the soil management and disposal. It's a large liability that I think if we put a lot of upfront effort to, it has the chance of really reducing our costs if we can be creative with it. So that's,
Absolutely.
I think if you
Yeah,
take away one message, it's the soil disposal side of things. I can't tell. So one more quick little statement. We're basically running out of lined landfill materials for soil in Massachusetts. In about a year or so, we're probably not going to have a place to dispose of these materials. They're probably going to have to be shipped off out of state, and it's going to be immensely expensive. So anything we can do to reduce soil disposal is going to be very helpful for us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's it, Phil.
That's it.
Wow, that was quick. Only 2 hours
Good
and
discussion. Good discussion.
2 hours. Yeah, it was excellent. I'm not complaining, but 2 hours and 16 minutes worth of it. So one thing I want to remind people of is the next full building committee meeting is on February 13th. So it won't interfere with your great celebration of Valentine's Day. And Bill, I'm going to suggest that we try to see if we couldn't have a subgroup meeting next week, if we can figure out a date and time that's appropriate for most. I do see 2 hands raised. That's all I've got to say. I think, Mary, you get your hand up first.
Yeah, I just, in anticipation for our next meeting and knowing how important that discussion is going to be, if we could get a summary of the notes that you're going to have from the working session so that we could kind of take a look at them before our meeting, before we have to make a big decision, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yep, that can be done. Charles?
Sure. A while ago, we had been talking about community presentations, and we actually had scheduled, the school had scheduled a date, which I don't think is going to work. Do we have any idea when a good timing would be to have another community presentation of the project?
I'm going to leave that to Phil and Chris. Based upon the things that are going on right now, the things you need to look at, I don't know what that date would be.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I would love to get out of the weeds a little bit and kind of get some decisions made. And
I agree. So there was a date that had been tentatively set that we will change. That was in March. But I want to have it later than that.
That'd be perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think after our schematic design submittal to MSBA, which is coming in April, I think so.
Yep. Jennifer?
We had also talked about having going to different community groups, going to the Council on Aging and things of that nature. Would that also be after the schematic design submission?
I think so, because all the questions that are being brought up now, hopefully there can be, or there needs to be a decision made that we move ahead and submit the schematic design to MSBA. At that point, the project will eventually get it. When it gets submitted, it will get approval based on the cost and by MSBA, and then it needs we have a pretty good process. What were we looking for the town meeting and election?
October, November.
October, November. So we have a good period. My experience is to start right after the schematic design is completed. Usually not a whole lot happens over the summer, so we can get a couple in June. maybe, and then May and June, and then pick them up pretty heavily in September. And it's the last 8 weeks that are really important, but we'll be happy to meet during the summer too, if people want to. But I'm finding that usually about 2 months before the town meeting, that's when people really get focused and interested. So I would expect a pretty heavy schedule in September, October.
Great, thank you.
I don't see any more hands up. Phil, do you have anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to call
That's all
for
That's all
a
we got.
motion.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Thank you. Let me adjourn via roll call. Brian. And I know a few people have dropped off. Greg Johnson.
Yes.
Let's see, who else? Justin. I don't know if he's still on, maybe not. Mary.
Yes.
Hillary, I don't think joined. Rob. Rouleau. Nope. Jill. Justine. I don't know why I said Jill.
I think
Justine, you're still here?
She had to go.
Ah.
So do we have to stay on if we don't have a quorum?
Stay all
That's
day.
it. We have to stay till they come back. That's right. We can
Can
think of
somebody
something to talk
filibuster for a
about.
while?
Mark Anderson.
Yes.
Anthony, he's gone already. I know that. Matthew.
Yes.
Perfect. And Nick.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, folks, guess what? We've had a good meeting. We're in the weeds for a whole bunch of it, but we got to go in and we got to dig. So
That's
I,